The fog lay heavy over Port Townsend that morning, a damp gray blanket that clung to rooftops and muffled the usual sharp tang of salt from the sea. Out at the far end of town, where old hemlocks stood like sentinels at the foot of the Olympic Mountains, Elias Thorne pushed open the cabin door and stepped onto the porch. The cold was sharp enough to bite, but it didn't make him flinch. At 70, Elias still held himself like a man carved from stone, back straight, chin slightly angled, shoulders squared as though he were standing inspection. For decades of Marine Corps discipline had shaped him into something unyielding, and even now, in retirement, he carried it in every movement. His face was a weathered topographical map of the places he'd served, wind-swept coastlines, blasted deserts, chaotic jungles. Whatever softness time might have granted another man had been denied to him. Only his eyes, pale as winter ice, carried a story deeper than orders and deployments, a long, painful history of watching the people he loved slip away. He was a widower. He was a father. He was a man who preferred silence to conversation. And he managed all three with the same rigid discipline he had once demanded from his platoons. As always, his day began at 4:45. A pot of black, bitter coffee was the first ritual, its steam curling upward in thin ghostly trails. Then came the inspection, his small clearing swallowed by forest on every side, the perimeter, a habit that had outlasted the wars by decades. He walked its edge with the same slow precision he once used when checking wire lines and boundary posts. His life had contracted into routines. And routine had become his final defense against grief. Inside, the cabin resembled a museum curated by a soldier with an aversion to clutter. Boots lined up with parade ground symmetry near the door. Cans of food stacked neatly, labels all facing outward. A faint scent of gun oil mixed with wood smoke filled the air. The heart of the small living room was the mantel. There rested a precisely folded American flag, its corners razor-sharp, encased in a polished wooden display box. It had once draped the casket of his wife, Helen. Beside it, his old K-bar knife was positioned like a sentry. And on the wall, covering nearly every inch, were photographs of his son, Caelan Thorne. Caelan as a wild little boy cannonballing into the icy waters of Puget Sound. Caelan at boot camp, face camouflaged, smiling with fierce determination. Caelan in his marine dress blues, crimson blood-striped sharp against the green uniform. Elias stared at those photos more often than he would ever admit. Caelan had followed his father into the Corps, but was now deployed somewhere across the world, a location Elias only knew through heavily redacted updates and a father's gut sense of danger. That knowledge was his greatest pride and his deepest ache. The cabin was too quiet. The silence gnawed at him. Later that morning, he drove into Port Townsend for his weekly supply run. The town was shaking off sleep, storekeepers sweeping sidewalks, fishermen unloading ice-packed crates, burly tourists drifting along Main Street like curious ghosts. Elias moved through the small grocery store with the same efficient precision he applied to everything. Mr. Henderson, the owner, a soft, round man with anxious eyes, brightened when Elias stepped inside. He always tried to coax conversation from the retired Marine, but more often than not, Elias shut it down before it started. "Morning, Mr. Thorne," Henderson chirped, wiping the counter nervously. "They're saying a wicked storm is rolling in from offshore. You stocked up?" "I am," Elias said, placing coffee and a couple of cans of beans in his basket. "Any word from your boy?" Henderson asked quietly. "From Caelan?" Elias's hand paused on the can. The muscles in his jaw tightened just a bit. "He's operational." It was the verbal equivalent of dropping a steel door. Henderson nodded, chastened. "Well, you tell him we're proud of him." Elias paid in cash and walked out without a reply. He wasn't rude, just finished. With people, with explanations, with pointless small talk. Transactions suited him because they ended quickly. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sky had darkened into a bruised shade of greenish-purple. The wind surged through the treetops, bending massive hemlocks and spruce with deep, groaning creaks. This wasn't a passing storm. This was something bigger, an atmospheric river barreling straight in from the Pacific. Rain didn't fall, it marched. A gray army advancing across the horizon. Elias fell into the automatic rhythm of preparation. He checked the window seals, tightened the tarp over the stacked firewood, cleared the gutters of pine needles and cones. All of it was routine, order in the midst of chaos, and that kept his mind steady. As night came early, the storm unleashed its full fury. Wind shrieked like it was alive, and rain hammered the metal roof in relentless waves. Elias settled into his chair, the fire crackling behind him, and began cleaning his service pistol piece by piece, letting the mechanical repetition lull him into focus. Then, a sound. It didn't match the storm. It was thin. Faint. Almost lost. A cry. Elias stopped mid-motion. He listened. Nothing but the storm. Then again. A weak, desperate whimper swallowed by the wind. Animal. He set the pistol down. His mind mapped the sound instinctively, sorting distance and direction like he had done on 100 different battlefields. The cry came from somewhere near the road, by the drainage ditch. His first instinct hit him hard. Ignore it. Nature was brutal. Nature decided who lived. He wasn't its caretaker. He had seen more than enough dying in his lifetime to know that interfering in things you couldn't fix often made everything worse. He stared at the fire, trying to bury the small, persistent sound. Another cry, sharper this time, cutting through the storm like a failing signal. Damn it, he muttered. He grabbed his heavy rain gear, pulled it on with practiced efficiency, took a flashlight, and pushed out into the storm. The wind tried to rip the door from his hands. Rain slapped hard against his face, horizontal like thrown gravel. He trudged toward the road, boots sinking into mud that clung and pulled at every step. His flashlight beam pierced the night in narrow, shaky slices of white. He swept the light along the ditch, a churning torrent of freezing brown water rushing through the swollen channel. Nothing. He almost turned back. He'd looked. He'd tried. That was enough. But a last sweep of the flashlight caught something. Something small. Something black and tan. Half submerged, pinned by the current. A puppy. A German shepherd pup, he guessed no older than 12 weeks, though it was so soaked and covered in mud it was hard to judge. Its tiny body shook violently with cold, tremors racking its frame. One hind leg was twisted at a grotesque, unnatural angle, the bone clearly broken and snagged on a tangle of roots. The rising water lapped at its muzzle. Its eyes were dull and clouded with hypothermia, blinking slowly, barely conscious. It let out a broken, faint cry. Elias stared at it. His face stayed a mask of stone. Leave it. The logical part of him, the part he had relied on to survive combat, loss, and years of solitude, spoke first. It's too far gone. It's suffering. Letting it slip under would be merciful. He shifted to climb back up the bank. He took one step. Then froze. His flashlight remained fixed on the trembling little body. The pup was still breathing. Still fighting. His jaw clenched. For a moment, a long moment, he was at war with himself. Then he muttered again, "Damn it," and slid back down toward the ditch. Elias braced himself against the slick mud as he slid down the bank. The storm roared around him, the wind tearing at his hood, the rain soaking him through despite the heavy gear. He crouched at the edge of the rushing water, the beam of his flashlight trembling in his hand as he assessed the situation the same way he'd once scanned a battlefield. The puppy was wedged deep, the broken leg twisted at an angle that made even Elias wince. Its trembling had weakened, its cries had softened to almost nothing. Its nose dipped dangerously close to the freezing water. He reached in. Cold bit straight through his gloves. The pup made a tiny sound, a strangled, instinctive whimper, but didn't have the strength to resist. Elias freed the shattered leg from the roots with cautious precision, lifting the small, fragile creature from the torrent. It weighed almost nothing, a limp, soaking bundle of bone and shivers. He cradled it inside his rain jacket, shielding it from the worst of the wind. The tiny body radiated a frightening lack of heat. "Stay with me," he muttered, though he wasn't sure if the dog could hear him. He climbed back up the bank, boots slipping in the mud, breath labored. At the top he paused, scanning the storm-dark forest as if expecting judgment, some voice telling him he'd just made a mistake. But there was only wind and rain and the faint, fading warmth of the small life pressed to his chest. Inside the cabin, he kicked the door shut behind him and hurried to the hearth. He stripped off his drenched coat and laid the puppy on a pile of towels near the fire. It didn't move. Its breathing was shallow, uneven. Elias assessed it the way he would a wounded soldier, calm, methodical, unflinching. The leg was a mess, a compound fracture, the bone displaced and jutting under the skin. The pup was breathing fast and shallow, its pulse fluttery and weak. "Damn," he said under his breath. This was beyond anything he could treat alone. He strode to the old wall-mounted telephone, one of the few concessions he'd made to modern life, and dialed a number he had memorized years ago. It rang several times before a sharp voice answered. "Sandy Val. It's Elias." There was a beat of surprise. "Elias? You never call. What happened?" "Casualty," he said bluntly. "German Shepherd pup. 12 weeks, maybe. Compound fracture in the hind leg. Severe hypothermia. Found it in the drainage ditch." A long silence stretched across the line, filled only by the distant howl of wind on her end. "Elias, it's a hurricane out there. The pass might be closed. Can it wait?" "Negative." His tone was clipped, absolute. "It won't make it to morning." Another exasperated pause. Then he heard her sigh. "Damn it, Thorne. You always choose the hardest route." "I choose the necessary route," he replied. "I'll be there. Keep it warm. No food. A tiny bit of sugar water if it's conscious. And Elias." "What?" "Don't get attached. That pup is likely going to die." She hung up. Elias stared at the silent receiver for a long second before setting it back. He returned to the pup, dried its fur carefully, and wrapped it in another towel. The tiny creature didn't resist or react. It was frightening how still it was. But it was breathing. Barely. So he worked. 40 minutes later, headlights cut through the storm outside. The front door flew open and Dr. Eva Sandoval stumbled inside. Her rain slicker was soaked, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her boots leaving muddy prints across the floor. She looked like she'd fought the same battlefield Elias had. "God, Elias," she muttered as she knelt beside the pup. "You never do anything halfway, do you?" She didn't baby talk the animal. Her hands were practiced, clinical, and quick. She checked the leg, the vitals, felt the puppy's chilled skin. "He's in deep," she murmured. "But he's fighting." Elias handed her a steaming mug of coffee. She took it without looking, then nodded once. "All right," she said. "Let's see what we can save." For the next hour, the cabin transformed into an improvised surgery room. Elias held lights, cut gauze, positioned the pup, and followed her sharp instructions with military precision. Eva set the bone with a snap that made Elias turn his head. She flushed the wound, applied antibiotics, stabilized the leg in a heavy splint, and started fluids. Slowly, the puppy's breathing steadied. "He'll live," she said finally, dropping into a chair with a tired groan. "But this is the easy part." She jerked her chin toward the sleeping pup. "That's a working-line shepherd, Elias. He's bred for a job. If you don't give him a mission, he'll tear this place apart." He's a loaded weapon without a target. I can handle a recruit, Elias said. Eva's eyes softened, just for a moment. This isn't a replacement for your son, she said quietly. Elias's jaw flexed. I didn't say it was. No, she murmured. But I've watched you for a long time. It's been years since anything breathed inside this cabin besides you. She stood, zipped her slicker, and gave him one last long look. Keep him confined, she said. Weeks of it. Call me if the fever comes back. And then she was gone, swallowed again by the storm. Elias stared down at the little creature curled on the blanket. It was small enough to fit into one of his hands. It looked impossibly vulnerable. He exhaled slowly. He had a recruit. The first weeks. If the rescue had been hard, the first week was hell. The pup woke often, confused and hurting, whining in a high, thin sound that scraped at Elias's nerves. It hated being immobilized. It hated the crate Elias had modified into a makeshift recovery cell. Elias didn't budge. He stuck to an exacting schedule. 0600, medication and a small controlled meal. 0800, cleaning the wound and checking the splint. 1200/1600/2000, small feeding spaced throughout the day. Middle of the night, wake, check breathing, check temperature. He slept on the floor next to the crate, waking every few hours like it was a battlefield night watch. The old Marine felt the exhaustion creeping into his bones, but he never entertained the thought of quitting. Somewhere around day 5, he gave the pup a name. It had fought hard to survive. It refused to quit. It stared at him with an almost soldier-like intensity. Valor. A virtue. A standard. A mission. And over the next several weeks, the little dog lived up to it. The splint stayed on, but strength returned. Valor's eyes brightened, his appetite grew, and the spark in him, the fire bred into working-line shepherds, came roaring back. Elias began training, though anyone else would have called it bonding. He pulled out old training manuals from his Marine Corps days and adapted them for a dog. His commands were short, sharp, and clipped. Sit. Stay. Quiet. Eyes. Valor picked them up as if born to obey. He learned hand signals within days. His intelligence was frightening. His loyalty was instantaneous. And slowly, very slowly, the iron walls around Elias began to show hairline cracks. He talked to the dog more than he'd talked to any person in years. Not soft words. But stories. Observations. Memories. Kalen broke his arm once, he said while changing a bandage. Fell out of the old oak behind the house. Didn't cry. Just analyzed the angle. Valor watched him silently, as if absorbing every syllable. One night, when Elias sat cleaning his K-bar at the fire, Valor limped out of his crate and pushed his nose against Elias's knee. Elias froze. That is not the at-ease position, soldier, he grumbled. Valor pressed harder. And after a moment, Elias, slowly, awkwardly, put his hand on the pup's head. The rumbling purr that rose from Valor's chest was the first warm sound in the cabin in years. Spring and the choice. Spring arrived, washing away the snow and leaving the forest smelling of damp earth and new growth. Eva returned one last time, checked the healed leg, and nodded once. He's mended, she said. Strong as he'll ever be. But a dog like this, he needs to choose his path. You have to give him the option. Elias didn't argue. He understood. The next morning, he opened the door. Fresh air swept inside. Pine. Soil. Sunlight. He unhooked the rope leash. All right, Valor. You're free. He tapped the dog's shoulder. The dismissal signal. Go. Be a dog. Valor looked at him, head tilted. Go, Elias repeated, turning his back and walking inside. It was the hardest order he'd given in years. Valor stayed at the threshold for a full minute. Then, with a burst of youthful strength, he bolted into the forest. A streak of black and tan disappearing between the trees. Elias watched from the window until he was gone. The cabin fell silent. The old, suffocating silence he'd fought for years. He told himself it was practical. That the mission was complete. He broke down his rifle and tried to slip back into his old hollow routine. An hour later, a scratch came at the door. He ignored it. Another scratch. Sharper this time. Elias opened the door. Valor sat there, panting, covered in twigs and dirt. And he wasn't alone. He dropped a freshly caught rabbit at Elias's feet. He looked up, tail giving one confident wag. It wasn't a gift. It was a report. I am operational. I am part of this unit. I choose this. Elias stared at him. Then, very slowly, his face cracked, just barely, a fraction of a smile. Hurrah, Valor, he murmured. Get inside. Let's secure that ration. If someone had passed through the wooded clearing that spring, they might have thought the cabin belonged to two very different versions of the same soul, one old and carved by decades of war, the other young, eager, burning to learn. And in many ways, that wasn't wrong. Valor transformed the cabin from a silent bunker into something alive. Every morning started with drills. And Elias didn't cut corners, not for himself, not for the dog. 0500, wake. 0515, perimeter walk. 0600, obedience session. 0700, tracking exercises. 1200, agility training. 1600, bonding tasks and scent work. It was a regimen tough enough to straighten the spine of a new recruit. Valor absorbed it all like training was in his blood. His focus was surgical, his energy was relentless. Where another pup would get distracted, Valor locked onto Elias's hand signals like they were sacred scripture. At 8 months old, he was already performing recalls, tight turns, and advanced scent detection with a sharpness that would impress professional handlers. But the true magic wasn't in the commands. It was in the connection. Elias had trained soldiers for decades. He had shaped men who would later lead platoons. He'd carved discipline into recruits who barely knew how to lace their boots. But he had never trained a creature that watched him with such absolute devotion. Valor didn't question him. Valor didn't judge him. Valor didn't need him to talk. And in that unspoken understanding, something inside Elias, something hardened, buried, locked away, began to thaw. Summer in the Olympics. Summer painted the forest in layers of green so lush it almost glowed. Pines and cedars towered overhead, their branches dripping with resin that filled the air with sharp, clean scent. Wild berries dotted the undergrowth. Rivers ran high and clear. Elias and Valor moved through it like shadows. They hiked daily, miles of mountain trails, fallen logs, steep ridges. Valor scaled inclines with powerful haunches, ears pricked, always half a step ahead but never out of sight. Occasionally he'd pause, looking back for approval, and Elias would give a small nod. That nod meant everything to the dog. One afternoon, while trekking through a thicket near the ravine, Valor caught a scent and froze, head low, tail straight, muscles locked. "What is it?" Elias murmured. Valor slinked forward through the brush, belly low, moving with silent precision. Elias followed until they reached a cluster of rocks. There, half tangled in nettles, lay a young doe with its hind leg trapped between two fallen branches. It thrashed in panic at their approach. Elias saw the fear in its eyes. Valor saw something else, the boundary between duty and compassion. "Stay," Elias ordered. Valor obeyed instantly, though every fiber of his instinct wanted to move. Elias approached the doe slowly, murmuring quietly. He eased the branches apart, freeing the trapped leg. The doe stumbled upright and limped away, vanishing into the trees. Valor's ears perked. His eyes flicked from the forest to Elias. "That," Elias said, kneeling beside him, "is mercy, soldier. Not everything is a target." Valor licked his chin once, as if he understood. And for the first time in years, Elias let out a soft breath that was almost a laugh. The quiet evenings. By summer's peak, evenings became the calmest part of their days. Elias would sit on the porch with a mug of coffee or tea, watching the shadows stretch long across the clearing. Valor would lie at his feet or sit beside him, alert to every rustle of the forest. The cabin didn't feel empty anymore. And Elias didn't feel like a ghost wandering through the remnants of a life that had long since passed. One evening, while Valor dozed beside the rocker, Elias went through a small wooden chest. Inside were a handful of carefully folded letters, every one of them from Kalin. Some came from training bases, others from austere deployments where sand filled every crevice of life. A few were written from undisclosed locations with more redactions than words. He ran his calloused thumb over the latest envelope. He hadn't opened it yet. He didn't know why. Or maybe he did. He stared at the slanted handwriting on the front, his son's handwriting, and felt a tightness in his chest he didn't want to acknowledge. Valor sensed the shift and lifted his head, eyes sharp. Elias exhaled and opened the letter. The first lines were standard. "Dad, I'm safe. I hope you're healthy. Tell Dr. Sandoval thank you again for the books." But midway through the second paragraph, the tone changed. "We lost Corporal Jensen last week. He was a hard worker. Good kid. Reminded me of myself at that age. We were clearing a compound when it happened. I was 2 steps behind him." Elias stopped reading. The word swam. The storm outside wasn't the only one in the cabin anymore. Hours passed before he could finish the letter. "Don't worry about me. I know you will anyway, but don't. You raised me strong. You showed me how to lead. Whatever happens here, I want you to know, everything I am, I got from you." At the bottom was a line that broke through every wall Elias had built. "When I get home, I want us to rebuild things. Properly. Like family again." Elias folded the letter with careful precision, then placed it back in the chest. His hands trembled slightly. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring into the dark. Valor padded over, leaned his head onto Elias's knee, and let out a soft rumble, something between concern and loyalty. "I don't," Elias whispered, voice cracking for the first time in years, "I don't know if I deserve that." His grief didn't explode outward the way it once had. It imploded, silent, crushing, suffocating. Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and covered his eyes with his hands. He didn't cry. He didn't make a sound. But his body shook with the effort of holding himself together. Valor climbed onto his lap, front paws braced gently against Elias's chest. His weight was solid, grounding. He pressed his forehead against Elias's shoulder, the warmth of him anchoring the old Marine like a lifeline. Elias didn't push him away. For the first time since Helen died, he let himself lean, just a little, on something that cared. Valor's instinct. After a long while, Elias rose, wiped his face, and went outside. The night was cold, crisp, silent except for the distant rush of wind through the pines. Valor followed closely, sticking to his side like a second shadow. Elias walked the perimeter, his usual ritual, but his steps were slower, less sure. Halfway around the clearing, his hand brushed the K-bar sheath at his hip, something he always wore out of old habit. Not a weapon now, more a memory. He paused beneath the hemlock tree where he often sat when thinking. For the first time, the solitude felt heavy. When he sank onto the log beneath the branches, Valor sat directly in front of him, staring up with unwavering intensity. "You're reading me too damn well," Elias muttered. Valor placed a paw on his boot. And something in Elias broke softly. He leaned forward until his forehead rested against Valor's, man and dog breathing the same cold night air. The contact lasted only a moment, but in that moment, Elias felt a warmth he hadn't let himself feel in years. He whispered, almost too quietly for even the night to hear. "Good boy. Thank you." Valor's tail tapped the ground once. Not eagerly. Not excitedly. But steadily, like an oath sealed. Something shifted that night. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But decisively. The world had taken much from Elias Thorne. But now, the world had returned something. Something loyal. Something brave. Something that refused to let him collapse into himself. Valor. His dog. His recruit. His anchor. Autumn crept into the Olympic forests like a quiet painter, brushing gold and crimson across the leaves. The air grew cooler, the wind sharper. The forest animals prepared for winter, and the days shortened, but inside the clearing, life carried on with a steady, strengthening rhythm. Valor's training had long since shifted from obedience to something more instinctive, something that belonged not just to the dog but to the bond between him and Elias. Elias had never intended to craft a search and rescue dog. He simply trained the way he knew how. But Valor learned in ways no ordinary pup could. He could track a thrown object through rain. He could differentiate scents across a wide perimeter. He understood hand signals, body cues, and even the subtle shifts in Elias's breathing. And sometimes, he responded before Elias gave a command at all. It wasn't magic. It was connection, deep, instinctive, built on trust and repetition. One crisp morning, Elias tossed a canvas scent rag into the underbrush for an exercise. Valor didn't just retrieve it, he mapped the scent trail with surgical accuracy, looping back and correcting his own path even when the trail diverged across the stream. Elias watched with a mixture of pride and something more complicated, something like awe. "Good work, soldier," Elias said when Valor returned, panting lightly, tail wagging in controlled satisfaction. Valor leaned against his leg, accepting the praise with the quiet dignity of a working dog who knew the mission wasn't about applause. Elias scratched behind his ear. "You're something else." Valor's ears perked, as if he understood and approved. The incident on the trail. The call for help came unexpectedly on a late afternoon in October. Elias was closing the shed when he heard frantic voices echoing from the trail about a half-mile from the cabin. Two hikers, a young couple, stumbled toward the clearing. The woman was crying, mud streaked across her jeans, and the man's face was tight with anxiety. "Please," the man shouted when he saw Elias. "Have you seen a kid?" "Our son, he wandered off, he's only 6, he was chasing a squirrel and..." He didn't finish. His voice cracked. Elias's mind shifted instantly into operational mode. "Where was he last seen?" he asked. "The trail fork," the woman choked. "We called and called, but he didn't answer. He's scared of the dark." Valor suddenly barked, sharp, focused. Elias snapped his fingers. "Track." Valor lowered his nose to the ground and sprinted toward the trail without hesitation. The couple stared in disbelief. "He can find him," the man gasped. Elias didn't answer. He followed. The hikers rushed after him. The forest grew darker as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Elias watched Valor's gait, steady, sure, laser-focused. Leaves rustled under the dog's paws as he cut through a dense patch of salal bushes and down a narrow deer path. Occasionally Valor paused, returned to a point, re-evaluated, then darted in a new direction. Elias nodded to himself. "Good boy," he murmured. After 10 minutes, Valor froze. His ears shot up. His tail stiffened. He barked, a deep, urgent sound, and darted into a cluster of fallen logs. Elias sprinted after him. There, curled in the hollow beneath the logs, was a small boy with tear-streaked cheeks and trembling limbs. Valor pressed his nose to the child's shoulder gently, then looked back at Elias and barked again. "I got him!" Elias called. The mother collapsed to her knees in relief when they returned to the trail. She embraced her son with a sob, thanking Elias over and over through her tears. But the boy's eyes were fixed on Valor. "He found me," the child whispered, stroking Valor's head. "He didn't let the forest eat me." Valor sat proudly, chest lifted. Elias rested a hand on the dog's back and felt a swell of something warm, something fierce. Pride. Not just in Valor, but in what they had built together. The news spreads. The hikers weren't from town, they were tourists. By the next week, their story had reached local news outlets. Then regional stations. Then national ones. A retired Marine and his German Shepherd save lost boy in Olympic National Forest. Reporters appeared at the base of Elias's long dirt road like migrating birds. Elias hated it. He refused interviews. He declined offers for Valor to demonstrate his abilities on camera. He turned away anyone who tried to film the property. Valor, on the other hand, watched the strangers with calm watchfulness, never aggressive, but clearly protective. Elias installed a makeshift barrier of logs at the edge of the property with a simple sign. "No trespassing. No media. This is not a tour." Still, word traveled. The sheriff stopped by one afternoon, hands in his jacket pockets, looking sheepish. "Look, Elias, folks mean well. That dog of yours is becoming a local legend." "Legends attract problems," Elias said flatly. The sheriff chuckled. "Yeah, well, sometimes they attract good things too." Elias didn't answer. Valor sat beside him like a statue, eyes scanning the woods. "You ever think," the sheriff said carefully, "about putting him to work? Officially, I mean. Search and rescue could use a dog like him." Elias tensed. Valor looked up at him, awaiting the decision. "No," Elias said after a long moment. "He's mine. We stay in our perimeter." The sheriff nodded, not pushing. But the idea lingered like smoke. Quiet before the storm. In early November, the weather turned rough, storms blowing in from the Pacific, the sky churning with dark gray clouds. Elias felt something in the air he couldn't quite name, an unease, a heaviness that made the cabin feel smaller. Valor sensed it too. His movements were sharper. His patrols around the cabin grew more frequent. His eyes constantly flicked to Elias, as if expecting something to happen. One evening, when the wind shrieked through the eaves, Elias sifted through the letters from Kalin again. Except this time, a new envelope lay among them, one he didn't recognize. The handwriting wasn't Kalin's. The return address was from the Department of Defense. His stomach dropped. Slowly, he tore the envelope open. Inside was a neatly typed letter. His eyes scanned it fast, heart pounding harder with every line. "Dear Mr. Thorne. This letter is to inform you that Staff Sergeant Kalin James Thorne's unit has experienced a significant incident in the region of." Elias's vision blurred. Words jumped out like gunshots. Engagement. Unknown casualties. Communication disrupted. Your son's status currently unconfirmed. Updates will follow. The paper slipped from his fingers and drifted to the floor. Valor stepped forward immediately, nudging Elias's hand with his nose. His ears flattened. A low, worried whine rose from his throat. Elias sat heavily in his chair, breath shallow, staring at nothing. "Unconfirmed," he whispered. "Unconfirmed means nothing." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Valor placed both paws on Elias's knee, trying to climb into his lap like he had when he was a puppy. But Elias was rigid, his body locked in place, his mind spiraling to every battlefield he had ever been on, every loss he had witnessed, every soldier he had sent home in a box. The cabin walls felt like they were closing in. "Not him," Elias muttered. "Not my son." Valor let out a deep, steady rumble, part comfort, part command. "Look at me. Stay present. Stay here." When Elias didn't respond, Valor did something he had never done before. He barked, short, sharp, powerful. It snapped Elias's mind back into his body. He blinked. His breath steadied. Slowly, with a hand that still shook, he rested his palm on Valor's head. The dog pressed closer. "Good boy," Elias whispered hoarsely. But the fear remained, coiled deep inside him like a creature with teeth. Something was coming. And neither he nor Valor knew the shape of it yet. The storm that rolled in that week wasn't just weather, it felt personal. The sky hung low over the mountains like a lid, trapping the cold air beneath it. Wind rattled the cabin, bending the tall hemlocks until they groaned under their own weight. Inside, Elias waited. It was the kind of waiting that hollowed a person out. The kind that stretched seconds into hours. The kind only soldiers' families knew far too well. Valor slept near the door, waking at every distant rumble of thunder, every shifting gust of wind. He wasn't resting, he was listening. Guarding. Waiting with his human. 3 days after the first letter, a government vehicle pulled up the long dirt road. The engine rumbled to a stop. 2 figures stepped out, one in dress uniform, the other in a dark suit. Elias didn't open the door at first. He stood in the center of the cabin, staring at the wood grain of the floor. Valor walked to him quietly, nudging his hand. Elias's voice was barely audible. "No." Valor nudged again. Firmer. Another knock. Then a voice, gentle, practiced, devastating. "Mr. Thorne, sir, may we come in?" The old Marine's shoulders rose and fell once, like he was breathing against a weight he couldn't lift. Finally, he walked to the door and opened it. The officers didn't need to speak. He already knew. But they spoke anyway, the words slow, careful, each one a hammer. "Your son, Staff Sergeant Kalen James Thorne, was killed in action, during the engagement reported earlier this week." Valor let out a sharp, confused whine. Elias didn't move. The officer continued, voice softer. "He served with honor. He saved members of his unit before." "Stop." Elias's voice was flat. Barely human. The officer nodded, stepping back. Another line, rehearsed, dreaded, followed. "We're here to deliver his personal effects, and arrange transport of." "I'll handle it," Elias said. He closed the door before they finished. The officers hesitated on the porch, then, with quiet respect, returned to their vehicle and drove away. Inside, Elias stood motionless. The cabin felt suddenly cavernous and suffocating at the same time. On the table lay a small box, his son's effects. He didn't open it. Instead, he walked to the mantel and stared at the flag already displayed there, the one from Helen's funeral. Valor approached him slowly, ears back, tail low. He rested his head against Elias's thigh. For the first time since the officers left, the old Marine breathed. It wasn't steady. It wasn't controlled. It broke. He sank onto the floor like his legs had given out, his hands shaking as he covered his face. And Valor climbed into his lap without hesitation, pressing his warm body against Elias's chest with all the strength he had. Elias didn't cry with sound. Men like him rarely did. But his chest heaved. His breath shattered. His fingers curled into Valor's fur like he was holding on to the edge of a cliff. Valor stayed absolutely still, no nuzzling, no licking, no whining. Just presence. Just weight. Just warmth. He had learned that from Elias himself. When someone is drowning, you don't thrash. You anchor. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat at the table with the small box in front of him, untouched. Valor lay at his feet, refusing even to close his eyes fully. Hours passed. Morning crept in. The box remained closed. Only when the first shaft of cold light touched the table did Elias finally reach out and lift the lid. Inside were items too small to carry so much pain. Kalen's dog tags. A journal, worn at the edges. A set of folded letters, unsent. A photo of Elias and Kalen taken years ago beside the old fishing dock. The journal lay on top. Elias picked it up with trembling hands. Valor rose, placing his head in Elias's lap again. The journal was filled with neat handwriting, his son's handwriting, spilling across the pages with confessions he'd never spoken aloud. I want Dad to forgive himself. He did the best he could. After deployment, I'm going home. I'm going to fix this. I miss him more than I ever thought possible. He's my hero. Elias closed the journal slowly, pressing his forehead against it. A sharp, strangled sound tore from his throat, half grief, half denial. Valor moved closer, leaning his entire weight against Elias's side, grounding him again. But grief is an ocean. And that morning, Elias fell straight into the deepest part of it. The funeral rites. 3 days later, a ceremony was held at the local military cemetery. A cold wind whipped across the field, scattering leaves across white headstones arranged with impossible symmetry. Elias wore his old dress blues, the same uniform he hadn't touched since Helen's funeral. The medals on his chest felt heavier than they should. Memories threaded through his mind like barbed wire. Valor remained at his heel the entire time, perfectly still except for the occasional lean into Elias's leg. The firing rifles cracked the air. The flag was folded, crisp, precise, painful. The chaplain spoke words Elias couldn't hear. When the folded flag was placed in his hands, his fingers tightened as though letting go would mean losing Kalen all over again. Valor rested his head against Elias's hip, anchoring him to the earth. When it was over, people spoke kind words. Hollow. Echoing. Empty. Elias didn't respond to any of them. He walked back to the truck in silence, Valor glued to his side. The dark period. For the next 2 weeks, the cabin went quiet. Too quiet. Elias didn't train Valor. He barely spoke. He didn't walk the perimeter. He moved like a shadow, slow, mechanical, hollow-eyed. Valor tried everything. He nudged Elias's hand. He brought him toys he hadn't touched in months. He placed the training rope in Elias's lap. He barked softly for attention. He lay his head on Elias's chest at night. He sat in front of Elias and stared into his eyes, trying to pull him back. The old Marine didn't react. Not fully. Grief had built walls even Valor couldn't climb. Then one morning, something changed. Elias didn't get out of bed. Not at dawn. Not at mid-morning. Not even when Valor pawed at him anxiously. Hours passed. Valor paced the room, whining softly, tail tucked, ears pinned. He nudged Elias's shoulder over and over. Still nothing. Finally, Valor crawled onto the bed and curled his entire body against Elias's side, something he'd never done in this way before. He pressed his forehead against Elias's ribs. He exhaled heavily. And then he stayed there. It wasn't comfort. It was confrontation. A silent, stubborn message. I am not leaving. You don't get to leave either. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, at last, Elias's hand lifted and rested on Valor's back. A weak gesture. Barely pressure. But it was contact. Valor froze, then leaned harder. Elias whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood. I can't do this, boy. Valor's chest rumbled softly. Not disagreeing. Not comforting. Just saying. You're not alone. Not anymore. Something in those quiet moments began to shift again. A small shift. Fragile. Almost imperceptible. But real. Elias eventually sat up, hands trembling. He looked at Valor, who sat rigid and alert, waiting for instruction. I hear you, Elias murmured. Let's start small. Valor's ears perked. Elias stood slowly and headed for the door. He opened it. Cold air swept in. The world outside was still turning. Elias stepped out. Valor stayed glued to his side. The first perimeter walk in weeks began, silent, slow, heavy, but it began. And that was enough. The first perimeter walk was shaky, slow, and broken in places. Elias didn't move with the calm confidence he once had. His steps dragged, his breath caught unpredictably, and sometimes he stopped altogether, standing silently beneath the towering hemlocks as though the weight of the world pinned him in place. Valor matched every step. If Elias paused, Valor paused. If Elias struggled, Valor moved closer. If Elias stopped breathing evenly, Valor nudged him until he continued. It wasn't training. And it wasn't obedience. It was guardianship. Over the next week, Elias expanded the perimeter walks, first a half loop, then the full circuit, then up toward the ridge where the trail met the old fire road. With every day, his breathing steadied. His eyes sharpened. His posture straightened by degrees. But grief didn't disappear. It sat behind his ribs like a stone, heavy and cold. Valor became the warmth that kept that stone from freezing him solid. Every morning, Valor brought Elias the leash. Sometimes he dropped it aggressively onto Elias's lap, tail whipping like a metronome demanding action. Other times, he placed it softly on the bed and waited. It wasn't a request. It was, you get up now. You move. We move together. Elias started talking again, not much, not loudly, but enough that the cabin no longer felt like a tomb. Mostly, he talked to Valor. You're stubborn, he muttered one morning while tying his boots. More stubborn than any recruit I've had. Valor thumped his tail twice, agreement. And you're smarter than most of them too. Valor thumped his tail again, proudly. And you don't listen half the time. Valor let out a short bark, absolutely unrepentant. Elias found himself smiling. Tiny smiles, ghost smiles, nothing big enough to break the sadness, but something was coming back to life. Eva returns. One cold morning, while Elias chopped kindling behind the cabin, a familiar car pulled into the clearing. Dr. Eva Sandoval stepped out, wrapped in a thick jacket, her dark hair tied back against the wind. Valor's ears shot up. He barked in recognition and sprinted toward her, leaping high enough that Eva staggered backward in surprise. Well, hello to you too, she laughed, rubbing his neck. You've gotten big, and heavy. Elias walked over, wiping his hands on his flannel shirt. Didn't expect company. You never do, she replied softly. That's why I come anyway. She studied his face carefully, too carefully. Elias shifted his weight, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. You heard, he said flatly. Eva nodded once. I'm sorry, Elias. He didn't respond. For a moment, the only sound was Valor's tail brushing the snow. I brought something, Eva said, reaching into her car. She pulled out a thick folder. Applications. The county SAR unit is expanding. They're looking for new handlers, and dogs. No, Elias said immediately. Eva raised a brow. That wasn't a command. It was a suggestion. You know my answer. I know what you think your answer is, she countered. But you and Valor saved that boy. And whether you like it or not, people noticed. That wasn't about people. I know. It was about purpose. Elias stiffened. Eva took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Elias, if you don't give your grief somewhere to go, it will eat you alive." Valor moved between them, pressing against Elias's leg as if reinforcing the point. Elias looked down at the dog, at the strong body, the steady gaze, the intelligence burning in those amber eyes. He inhaled deeply, then exhaled through clenched teeth. "I'll consider it." Eva smiled faintly. "That's all I wanted." The blizzard. The first true winter storm of the season struck without warning. A sudden, violent surge of icy wind descended from the mountains, dragging snow with it in thick, relentless waves. The sky darkened at noon. The forest vanished behind curtains of white. By evening, snow had piled nearly knee-deep. Elias secured the cabin and stoked the fire. Valor paced restlessly, ears flicking at each howl of wind. Elias clipped on Valor's night beacon, a small red light that made him visible in low visibility. "Tonight, we stay put," Elias said. "Nature's in command." But nature had other plans. Just after dusk, the emergency alert siren from town echoed faintly through the storm. Elias stiffened. He hadn't heard that sound since before Kalen was born. What in? A moment later, tires skidded on the road. A sheriff's SUV crawled into the clearing, struggling through the snow. Sheriff Rowe jumped out, breath smoking in the freezing air. "Thorne," he shouted over the wind. "We need help." Valor was already at the door, whining sharply. "What happened?" Elias asked. A girl, 8 years old, wandered from her family's cabin up near the ridge. They looked everywhere. "We tried to bring in a drone, but the storm grounded it. We can't send anyone blind into that mess." Elias felt the old instinct rise in him, a coiled, iron-hard readiness. "Her name is Maya Sterling," Rowe continued. "She's been missing 6 hours. Temperature's dropping. If we don't find her soon." "We'll find her," Elias said. Rowe blinked. "We?" Elias nodded toward Valor, who stood like a statue in the doorway, red beacon glowing through the swirling snow. "Let's gear up." The search. The storm swallowed them whole. Wind tore at Elias's coat. Snow hit his face like shards of glass. Every breath burned cold. But Valor, the storm was his element. He cut through the drifts like a wolf, muzzle low, legs strong, beacon flashing in rapid bursts. Elias followed close behind, each step deliberate. Behind them, Sheriff Rowe struggled but kept pace as best he could. At the ridge trail, Elias knelt and held out Maya's scarf, a small pink scrap the sheriff had retrieved from her family. "Valor," Elias said, voice steady. "Find." Valor inhaled deeply, letting the scent sink into him. Then he barked once and launched forward. His beacon became a streak of red zigzagging between trees. The snow-muted sound muffled everything except the crunch of boots and the whistle of wind. Elias watched Valor's body language, head low, tail straight, legs driving hard. Valor stopped suddenly, sniffed the air, then veered left off the trail, straight toward the treacherous slope that led to the ravine. "Easy," Elias warned, following. "Careful." Valor didn't slow. He pushed deeper into the storm, skidding across ice, bounding over fallen logs half buried in snow. Then. A bark. Sharp. Urgent. Elias broke into a run. He found Valor circling a narrow pocket at the base of a large cedar tree. Snow drifted heavily. Something small lay partially buried beneath a branch. A mitten. Bright pink. "Maya!" Elias shouted. Valor darted forward, pawing at the snow. Elias dropped to his knees and dug with bare hands until they uncovered a small form curled tightly beneath the branch. A girl. Unconscious. Skin pale, lips blue. "We've got her!" Elias yelled. "Get the thermal blanket." Rowe fumbled with the equipment. Elias scooped Maya into his arms, pulling her against his chest to share warmth. Valor pressed close, body heat radiating through the girl's side. "We're moving," Elias commanded. But the storm had intensified, visibility nearly zero. They were still a mile from the main trail. Elias fought the wind, his breath ragged. Valor stayed at his side, pushing against his leg to keep him upright. Halfway up the slope, a violent gust slammed into them. Elias staggered. Maya nearly slipped from his grip. Valor lunged, bracing his body against Elias's knee, keeping him upright. But the gust didn't stop. It grew worse. The storm became a wall. And then Valor slipped. The slope gave way beneath him. Snow and ice collapsed in a sheet, dragging the dog downward. "Valor!" Elias roared. The red beacon flashed wildly as Valor tumbled, struggling to regain footing, claws scraping ice. Elias couldn't move, Maya was in his arms. If he dove, all three of them would be lost. "Valor! Get up!" Elias bellowed again. For one terrifying second, the red beacon vanished in the darkness. Then, from the swirling white, Valor's head rose. He fought his way upward, body shaking, eyes locked on Elias. He dug his claws into the ice, pulling himself inch by inch back toward them. Elias reached out with one hand, still holding Maya tightly with the other. "Come on, boy. Come on." Valor lunged, caught Elias's wrist between his teeth, not biting, just anchoring, and Elias hauled him the last few inches to safety. Valor collapsed at Elias's feet, chest heaving, snow crusted to his fur. "Good boy," Elias gasped. "Good boy." Valor pressed his forehead against Elias's leg, trembling but alive. They made it back to the trail. Then down the mountain. Then to the sheriff's truck. Maya survived. And when the story spread, because of course it spread, the town didn't talk about the officers or the search parties or even Elias. They talked about Valor. The shepherd who defied a blizzard. The dog who saved a child. The hero with fire in his heart. And for the first time since Kalen's death, Elias didn't turn away from the praise. He placed a hand on Valor's strong, scarred shoulder. "He earned it," Elias said quietly. Valor leaned into him, tail sweeping the snow behind them. In the weeks following the blizzard rescue, Valor's reputation grew far beyond the small mountain town. Stories spread like wildfire, passed from hiker to ranger, from ranger to sheriff, from sheriff to local reporters. Before long, the tale of the shepherd who beat the storm was shared in newspapers, blogs, and even national emergency response forums. Elias tried to ignore the noise. He'd spent his life avoiding praise, not chasing it. But Valor handled it all with quiet dignity. He didn't preen or show off. He simply watched everyone with calm, measured intelligence, as if none of the admiration mattered unless Elias acknowledged it. One morning, just after the snow began to melt into patches of wet slush, Sheriff Rowe returned to the clearing, this time with two other individuals in tow. One wore the tan jacket of the county's search and rescue commander. The other carried a clipboard heavy with forms. Elias felt his jaw clench. "I didn't ask for company." "We know," Rowe said gently. "But hear them out." Valor approached the newcomers with cautious curiosity, circling them once, evaluating. His posture was confident but alert, the stance of a soldier checking potential allies. The commander stepped forward. "Mr. Thorne," she said, "we're formally requesting that you and your dog join the Olympic SAR K9 division. Not part-time. Not volunteer. Official." Elias crossed his arms. "We're not interested." "You should be," the commander replied without flinching. "Your dog is remarkable. And you trained him. You kept a child alive in a blizzard. You saved another lost boy months before that. We've reviewed both incidents. What you two have is rare. Not unique, Elias said. Actually, it is, the commander corrected. Valor isn't just talented. He's operating at a professional level, and you're operating at a military level. Together. That's a resource this region desperately needs. The woman with the clipboard stepped forward. This is the certification packet, she explained. K9 operational evaluation. Handler physical tests. Team coordination drills. Tracking assessments. Rescue simulations. It's not symbolic. It's hard. I know what hard looks like, Elias said. That's why we're here, the commander replied. We need hard. We need steady. We need capable. Elias opened his mouth, ready to refuse again. Then Valor nudged his leg. Not gently. Not playfully. With purpose. Elias looked down. Valor stared up at him, amber eyes sharp, expression clear. We need this. You need this. I choose this. Elias exhaled slowly, fighting the tightness building in his chest. Give me 48 hours, he said. The commander nodded. We'll await your call. As they left, Valor sat beside Elias on the porch, watching them disappear down the road. You're pushing me, Elias muttered. Valor barked once, confirmation. Elias rubbed the dog's head and sighed. I suppose you're right. The decision. That night, Elias sat at the table, turning the unopened certification forms over in his hands. Valor rested on the floor with his head on Elias's boot. Elias stared at the blank lines where his signature would go. I never plan to serve again, he whispered. Valor nudged his boot once. Soft. Reassuring. You know what this means. Structure. Orders. People. Command. I walked away from that world. Valor nudged again. Firmer. You're sure about this? Valor's tail thumped once. Elias felt something shift in his chest, not a breaking, but an unlocking. He signed the form. The training begins. The SAR training grounds were spread across a forested valley 2 hours from Elias's cabin. The first day, a group of handlers and their dogs gathered for orientation, German shepherds, Malinois, labs, and even a bloodhound named Molly who snored loudly during introductions. Valor sat beside Elias with perfect discipline, alert, calm, unshakable. Let's begin with obedience and control, the instructor announced. Handlers, recall your dog from 50 yards. Distractors will be present. Handlers moved to their marks. The distractors, runners, flapping flags, squeaky toys, took positions. Recall. Dogs sprinted toward their handlers. Some got distracted. Others hesitated. Valor didn't. He cut through distractions like slicing through fog, eyes locked on Elias the entire time. His recall was so fast and precise that the instructor blinked. That's excellent work, she said. Elias simply nodded. He's focused. Next came scent work. They hit a glove in a patch of forest and marked the search area boundaries. Most dogs struggled with the swirling mountain wind. Valor didn't. He mapped the wind, listened to it, interpreted it. Elias watched him work, nose high for airborne scent, then low when he caught ground residue. He located the glove in under 2 minutes. Is he even tired? The instructor muttered in disbelief. No, Elias said. Not yet. Memories resurface. But not every challenge was about Valor. Some were about Elias. The handler fitness evaluations weren't just physical, they were psychological. They simulated high-stress rescue conditions with blaring sirens, smoke machines, chaotic shouting, and the disorienting roar of helicopter blades. For others, it was noise. For Elias, it was memory. A battlefield resurrected. The shockwave of explosions. The screams of injured men. Sand in his teeth. His son, young, determined, wearing the uniform he'd once worn. Elias's breath hitched. He closed his eyes, fighting to stay grounded in the present. A hand touched his leg. Firm. Solid. Valor. Not pulling. Not whining. Anchoring. Elias crouched and rested his forehead against Valor's. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here." And Valor held him steady until the memory passed. When Elias stood again, something had changed. He was ready, not just for the test, but for the future. The final evaluation. The toughest test came last, a simulated search in a rugged canyon, with human volunteers hidden throughout the terrain. Handlers were judged on time, dog teamwork, navigation accuracy, safety, recovery methods. Elias and Valor were the last to run. The evaluator blew the whistle. Go. Valor shot forward. Elias followed, reading terrain, marking hazards, checking wind direction. Valor stopped suddenly at a fallen log, sniffed deeply, then bolted left. "Show me." Elias commanded. Valor barked and dove into a cluster of rocks. A volunteer lay inside, pretending to be unconscious. "Found." Elias shouted. They pressed on. The second volunteer was buried under brush on the far ridge. Valor found him in minutes. The third was hidden high in a tree, simulating a stranded climber. Most dogs struggled. Valor didn't. He sat beneath the tree, barking in a specific rhythm that signaled vertical alert. The evaluator's jaw dropped. "That's advanced work," she whispered. Elias just nodded. "He's adapting." The last volunteer was hidden deep in a cave. A difficult scent. Confusing airflow. Tricky terrain. Valor entered the dark cave without hesitation, paws tapping on rock, breath steady. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. 1 full minute. Elias's heartbeat quickened. Then. Valor barked twice. Elias followed the sound and found Valor standing beside the final volunteer, tail wagging hard, chest heaving. "That's time," the evaluator called. When Elias and Valor emerged from the cave, the entire SAR team was waiting. Slow claps turned into applause. Rowe stood at the front. "I think we have our top team." The commander approached with a small velvet box. "Elias Thorne," she said, "Valor Thorne, welcome to the Olympic Mountain Search and Rescue K-9 Division." Inside the box was the unit patch. 2 mountains crossed by a compass. And below it, K-9 Team, Certified. Elias didn't take it at first. He stared at it long enough that the commander almost withdrew her hand. Then Elias murmured, voice quiet, thick, but steady. "For my son." He affixed the patch to his jacket. Valor pressed his nose into Elias's palm, tail sweeping in slow, proud arcs. For a moment, the world felt aligned. Not healed. Not fixed. But aligned. Purpose had returned. And with it, life. The winter thaw gave way to a cold, unpredictable spring, one of those seasons when the mountains couldn't decide whether to wake or stay frozen. But Elias and Valor didn't wait for gentle weather. They began their SAR duties immediately, stepping into their new roles with the firm discipline of a seasoned team. Their first official call came only a week after certification. A rock climber had gone missing near the basalt cliffs south of the ridge. Valor tracked him in under 40 minutes, locating the injured man wedged beneath an outcrop, dehydrated and drifting in and out of consciousness. The team extracted him safely. Their second call came 3 days later, a pair of lost hunters caught in unexpected snowfall. Valor found them huddled in a shallow ravine, their flashlight batteries dead and their fire long extinguished. By the end of the month, the County-Sierra commander said something that would echo across many briefings to come. Thorn and Valor are our tip-of-the-spear team. Elias didn't smile. Valor didn't wag. But they both stood straighter. It wasn't glory they wanted. It was service. And they delivered. The call that changed everything. Late in April, just as the snows receded and early wildflowers began pushing through the frost, the radio crackled at 4:17 a.m. Priority search request. 2 hikers missing on the North Face route, possible injury. Severe weather inbound. Teams mobilize immediately. Elias was already pulling on his boots before the dispatcher finished speaking. Valor paced at the door, stiff with anticipation, tail held straight. He knew the tone of that call. By the time they arrived at base camp, the sky had gone from gray to an ominous iron color. The wind picked up sharp and bitter. A storm was rolling down the mountains far faster than expected. The commander met Elias with a grim expression. Hikers were last seen about 6 hours ago. One made a distress call, mentioned a fall, possible broken pelvis. Signal was weak. We think lightning knocked out the relay. Coordinates? Elias asked. We've got a rough grid. It's wide. Too wide. She looked down at Valor. That's where he comes in. Elias clipped Valor's vest, checked his beacon, and knelt. Find, he said. Valor's ears snapped forward. His muscles coiled. His eyes sharpened. And then he shot into the forest. The search through hell. The North Face route wasn't a typical hiking path. It was steep, dangerous, a maze of boulders, cliffs, and sudden drops. The terrain had humbled seasoned climbers. For a search and rescue dog, it was a gauntlet. Valor flew across the ground, weaving around jagged rocks, claws gripping even the slickest surfaces. Elias followed, his breathing deep and steady, ignoring the burn in his legs as the incline increased. They scanned ridges, checked draws, crossed a narrow creek swollen by melting snow. Then, Valor stopped. His entire body stiffened. Nose lifted. Tail straight. He'd caught something. He swung sharply left and led Elias to the edge of a steep granite slope. As Elias reached him, he heard it. A faint, distant cry. Help. Elias's blood chilled. Good boy, he whispered. Take me to them. Valor barked once, confirmation, and began the descent. The storm hit at the same time. Wind blasted through the canyon like a freight train. Snow followed it, slashing sideways. Elias kept low, shielding his face, pushing through the onslaught. Valor pushed harder. They rounded a rocky spur and found the first hiker, alive but badly injured, leaning against a fallen log, clutching his leg. Valor went straight to him, nudging his shoulder gently before barking back at Elias. I see him, Elias called. We've got one. The man blinked through the snow. My partner, he fell farther. I can't. We'll get him, Elias said firmly. Stay awake. He radioed the coordinates to base. More teams would follow, but in the storm, they'd be slow. Valor barked again, short, sharp. He wasn't done. Go, Elias commanded. Find him. Valor bolted downslope. Elias followed, but the storm was turning vicious. Snow piled rapidly. Wind lifted loose flakes like white smoke. Valor vanished into the white. Valor. Elias shouted. No answer. He pushed forward, heart pounding. The visibility dropped to almost nothing. Trees were ghostly shapes. The slope steepened dangerously. Then. A flash of red from Valor's beacon. Elias scrambled toward it, sliding on loose snow. He found Valor standing at the edge of a narrow ledge, and below him, clinging to a jut of rock, was the second hiker. Barely conscious. hanging above a 40-foot drop. Valor barked frantically. Elias dropped to his stomach and crawled forward. "I've got you," he shouted down. "Stay with me." He looped a rope through his harness and anchored it to a tree, lowering himself just enough to reach the man's arm. As he pulled the hiker upward inch by inch, Valor stayed pressed beside Elias, body rigid, watching the drop like he could hold back gravity with sheer will. When Elias finally dragged the man onto the ledge, Valor lunged forward and began licking the hiker's face to keep him awake. "Good boy," Elias panted. "Damn good boy." But the storm wasn't finished. A violent gust slammed into them, knocking Elias sideways. Valor barked and threw his weight into Elias, preventing him from slipping over the edge. The gust grew stronger. Then, a crack thundered through the ridge. The snow shelf above them broke loose. "Move!" Elias roared, grabbing the injured hiker. Valor ran ahead, carving a path through snow as it collapsed behind them. Elias followed, dragging the man, slipping, gasping. Half the ridge gave way. Valor made it to solid ground. Elias did not. Snow crashed into him from behind. He stumbled, lost his footing, and nearly went over the edge, still holding the injured hiker. "Valor!" Elias screamed. Valor spun and launched himself at Elias, teeth gripping the strap of Elias's harness with desperate force. The dog braced with all four limbs, muscles trembling, paws carving deep grooves in the snow. Elias used Valor's weight to pull himself and the hiker upward. The avalanche debris settled. Silence returned. Valor collapsed in the snow, exhausted, chest heaving, eyes barely open. Elias dropped beside him. "You saved us," he whispered, voice breaking. "You saved us all." Valor lifted his head weakly and nudged Elias's chin. Then he fainted. The fight for Valor. The extraction team arrived 20 minutes later, guided by Elias's radio. The hikers survived. Elias survived. Valor was taken straight to the county emergency vet clinic. Eva met them at the door, fully gowned, her face etched with worry. "What happened?" "He pushed too hard," Elias said hoarsely. "Too far." "He held a full-grown man's weight on a slope. He ran in that storm for hours." Eva examined Valor quickly. "Pulse weak. Hypothermia. Muscle strain. Possible ligament tear. But he's in there. He's fighting." Elias sat beside Valor through the entire night. He didn't sleep. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He kept one hand on Valor's paw, fingers trembling as he whispered over and over. "Stay, soldier. Stay." At dawn, Valor opened his eyes. Elias exhaled a breath that shook his entire frame. "You scared the hell out of me," he muttered. Valor licked his hand. Eva smiled through tears she tried to hide. "He's going to make it." The final letter. A few days later, after Valor was stable and resting comfortably at home, a package arrived at the cabin. Department of Defense. Addressed to Elias. He almost didn't open it. But something told him he needed to. Inside was a small USB drive and a note. Recovered from Staff Sergeant Thorne's personal locker. For his family. With shaking hands, Elias inserted the drive into his old laptop. A video loaded. Kalen appeared on screen, sitting under a tarp in harsh desert light, dust blowing behind him. "Hey Dad," he said, smiling that crooked smile Elias hadn't seen in years. "If you're seeing this, well, you know what that means." Elias froze. Valor lifted his head and pressed against Elias's leg. Kalen continued. "I want you to know something. I wasn't afraid. Not once. Because I had your training. Your stubbornness. Your backbone. Everything you taught me, it carried me farther than you'll ever know." Elias swallowed hard, throat burning. And Dad, you don't get to disappear. Not after everything you survived. You don't get to hide from life. You don't get to shut yourself away. He leaned closer to the camera. You have more to give. You always have. The video ended. Elias wiped his eyes and rested his forehead in his hands. Valor slowly climbed into his lap, carefully, mindful of his injuries, and laid across him fully. Elias wrapped his arms around the dog, holding him tightly. You and Kaylin, Elias whispered, you both saved me. Valor closed his eyes and let out a soft, peaceful rumble. Epilogue, Legacy. Months passed. Valor healed, slowly at first, then with renewed strength. Elias healed too, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. They returned to the field. Together. They found lost hikers, missing children, stranded climbers. They worked storms, floods, and nights so cold the air felt like glass. They became the most trusted team in the region. But beyond missions and rescues, more important things happened. Elias laughed again. Valor's tail wagged freely. The cabin grew warm, not from fire, but from life. People in town no longer whispered about tragedy when they spoke of Elias Thorne. They spoke of resilience. Strength. Legacy. And always. They spoke of valor. The dog who brought a Marine back to life. The partner who filled a broken home with heart again. The companion who became family. One evening, while watching the sunset spill gold over the pines, Elias placed his hand on Valor's head. You're not just a good dog, he murmured. Valor looked up. You're my best work. Valor leaned against him, tail swaying softly, agreeing, affirming, promising. Together, they watched the last light fade. Not as a wounded man and a rescued pup. But as a team forged from loss, love, courage, and a promise. To never leave each other behind.